Plattsburgh. My name is John Gordon, and I am speaking to you as the chair of the Plattsburgh Tenants Advocacy Association. Last week, we canvassed the community for questions for each mayoral candidate, and we have prepared an interview with each candidate for you to view. The presentation for each interview will be different due to the planning process and the last-minute nature of these interviews. We have contacted both candidates over the weekend, and each scheduled us at their earliest convenience and gave us as much time as they were able. We met with Chris 2 days ago, Sunday evening, a short time after the questions were sent out, and our conversation with Scott occurred earlier this afternoon, today on Tuesday. Both candidates were offered the opportunity to review the questions beforehand. Now, here's what you came for.
My name is Chris Rosenquest. I am a county legislator and mayoral candidate here in the city of Plattsburgh. I am endorsed by the Democrats and the Working Families Party, and won the Democratic primary in June. I think it kind of flowed over into July, but that is a little bit of the election background right now. I have served on the county legislature for 2 terms, 5 years now. I'm in my second term. As a county legislator, I have served as the chair of the Economic Development and County Operations Committee, and in that role is very focused on economic development and the concepts of economic development, and I've been steeped in that for the last 5 years. I've also, for 2 of those years, I've served as the chairperson of the Finance Committee as well.
Sweet.
Also, as a legislator, I'm the liaison to Clinton Community College, so we talk about workforce development and that partnership with the college. And education, local education. I am liaison to the Workforce Development Board as well. So again, more workforce development and supporting our workforce and developing and training workforce. And then also the liaison to the North Country Chamber of Commerce. And so develop some expertise and support for them in developing the strategic tourism and destination marketing plan that they put out every year.
So definitely not a short list of on your resume there.
No, and that's just the legislative work that I do. I'm on a couple boards here in Plattsburgh as well. I'm on the IAM Steering Committee, which is the Institute for Advanced Manufacturing Steering Committee. I'm on the Literacy Volunteers Board. I own a downtown business, as most of you all know, and then my wife and I have a 3-year-old. So we got some things going on.
I guess so. So I'll jump right into the first part here, which is the rent control affordability questions.
Yes.
So the first one is, what is your position on rent control and or rent stabilization? Do you support any form of rent control, and how would you address unaffordable rental prices?
Yeah, so rent control is rent control and rent stabilization in our community is challenging. I don't support it. There are certain rent protections that I do support for specific populations of people, disabled, elderly, and so there's certain safeguards that we can put in place as a community and I believe under the Emergency Tenant Protection Act that got passed not too long ago, there are some protections for certain populations of people in our community. The challenge with rent control in our situation is that going back to that Emergency Tenant Protection Act, ETPA. I'm not going to say the acronym. I think it's a little more challenging to say the acronym. But talking about that Emergency Tenant Protection Act, certain hurdles, certain caveats would have to be met in order to even consider being a rent-controlled municipality. One of those hurdles, one of those caveats is to do an official housing study. That housing study would have to come back indicating that we had a less than 5% availability rate of available rentals, and it would also have to fit in a very specific set of types of rentals, units of 6 or more, and units that were built before a particular year, which we don't have a lot of. And so even if we did that, I don't think our community would even be officially recognized as a community that could be managed as a rent control community. And then also once that happens, then other state agencies kind of come in and take over. Then that was my understanding when that law first came out. The issue with unaffordable rental pricing, that's a concern certainly throughout our community, not just in the city of Plattsburgh, but throughout the county. And what we're seeing is that as rents go up, as landlords improve their properties, low-income folks are being pushed further and further out from the job center. And these are folks that, they have a kid, or maybe two kids, they have children. They might have two working adults in the household, but they only have one car. And so these are folks that have to shuttle the kids to school, shuttle one of the adults to work, shuttle the other adult to work. And if, say, their car breaks down, or if they become underemployed or less employed due to COVID, they're in a bind. And we're seeing that throughout the county and throughout our city. So, there is a need for affordable housing. There is a need for low-income housing. And that's something that, as a municipality, although we can't build directly, we could certainly support organizations like Plattsburgh Housing Authority, Plattsburgh Community Housing. We could leverage, which is what I've been kind of hounding on, we can leverage tools like a land bank to look at dilapidated zombie properties and remediate, or even demolish if we needed to, but remediate and then turn that back into some type of low income or affordable housing. So that would be, in terms of the rent control and affordability, I don't support rent control, but I think that there are ways to introduce and increase the number of affordable housing as a municipality. And as a mayor, it's a little challenging, but there are partnerships that we can create to help address that problem. Not only just with, say, like PHA and community and Plattsburgh Community Housing, but even with DSS. We've been advocating early on. So the county has a low-income home ownership program. $400,000 is allocated to that program for low-income homeowners to support low-income families to purchase their first homes. And $400,000 goes into that fund to help that. Because of COVID, that money has been shifted over to more emergency rental funding, along with another $320,000 OCMB. I probably, that's not the right acronym, but it's another agency that Friends of the North Country works with that has gotten us money for the same kind of emergency rental support.
Right. So how do you support income-constrained seniors who are unable to keep up with rent increases?
Yeah, that goes back to, in my mind anyway, that goes back to ensuring that we're increasing our tax base. Because if we have, not to say that there's going to be moderate or modest increases in rents, and they're economics demand that there will likely be increases in rents over time, regardless of who's renting. But that goes back to, how do we stabilize our tax rate? How do we stabilize and lower our tax rate? And that could be done through a number of mechanisms. As you know, a municipality can only generate revenue in a certain number of ways, and it's very limited how we can generate revenue. But looking at the ways that we can generate revenue and making sure that we can enhance them and improve on them, that is a way to ensure that all of our rents stay low and stay manageable. But then there's also those protections that, seniors and disabled folks, they need as well. I don't have an answer to how to straight up protect or what mechanisms we can implement as a city or as a community to do that, but it's certainly something that I can, we can work together on, and we should be working together on. That's also key to this, is that, short of one person being an expert in it, which I'm not an expert in it, leveraging folks like you and leveraging folks like the landlord group to help solve these problems, because they are also, you know, they can also contribute to understand the impact of this and help solve these problems as well.
Right.
Shalice, you wanted to jump in?
I did. I have a follow-up question to that. So you
Yeah.
touched base on the tax rate being a potential solution to this. Do you feel that the tax rate in the city is the chief contributor to raising rental prices?
No, it's not. It's not. It's, you know, with the lack of supply that we have in the market right now, and we don't, you know, we're at, I think the city of Plattsburgh last count, unofficial count, was at 2% availability rate for rentals. And so, you know, there is a need for more housing. So when we look at how to maintain and manage the price increases of rental properties, it's not just a tax rate issue, it's also availability issue. It's a supply and demand issue. I'm not an economist, but, you know, anybody who looks to rent someplace in Plattsburgh also knows that, you know, it's hard to find something. It's hard to find quality something too, right? So that's part of the concern that we have in general, is not only is there a difficulty in finding low to moderate quality housing, and low to moderate income housing and affordable housing does not, nor should it mean sacrificing price for a unit for quality of that unit. You know, the place should still be kept up, and it should still look nice, and it should be safe, and but there is a supply issue when it comes to housing availability, not just in the city of Plattsburgh, but that's an issue that we're seeing throughout the county.
Right. So, what would you do to support local wage growth to offset the high cost of housing in our area?
Well, again, it's as a mayor, I look at this from the context of, you know, not only just the context of what I've been working on in the world of like economic development and housing availability, but also looking at it, what's available to me, or what are the tools that I have as a mayor. And I do have to go back to what are the available opportunities for creating jobs in our area, you know, and what are we doing as a municipality to help support that type of growth, which I don't think we do well. I don't think we do. I think we fall short in that sense of, how do we, as a municipality, how do we have a seat at the table to help create jobs? How do we have a seat at the table to help create opportunities for growth in terms of, you know, increasing tourism, or increasing destination marketing, or investing in our quality of life opportunities, so that it looks more attractive for jobs to locate and grow here. So, you know, I look at it from not a perspective. Well, there certainly is a perspective from as a mayor, to ensure that our employees are making a living wage, and ensuring that, you know, their rates and their increases are in line with cost of living increases every year. And so there's some control on that end, but on the other end, the control for ensuring that we have local wage growth is making sure that we're an attractive city that people come to invest in.
Would you consider passing a localized minimum wage for our community, recognizing that the cost of living within our community is out of balance with the minimum wage?
What is the hourly cost of living minimum right now in our community?
I don't have that data in front of me. I'm trying to pull it up right now. So.
Yeah, no, I got you. Okay, no, that's fair. But that's the question, right? Like, is the cost of living, is the minimum wage right now, or the average hourly paid job right now, is that sufficient for our community? I don't know that answer, right? And there is some work to do in the answer. And we're seeing, every year, and we'll get to $15 an hour, even if that's a question whether $15 an hour is a living wage. That's questionable. But there's the question of what is available to us to do that. Is that something that we should be considering? I am a small business owner, so how does that also impact small businesses? Because we want them to thrive as much as we want, people to have living wages and affordable housing. I don't have an answer to that.
Businesses would thrive if there was more cash flow in the local economy, though, correct?
Sure, it would, yep. And as well as long as people are spending locally, and that helps, and we just there is a drive, and there's currently certainly a drive and a push to spend local because of COVID crisis, and like I said, I'm a small business owner. I want people shopping at my coffee shop and not Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts. So making sure that they're locally, again, when I say, before when I said, we don't do very well at promoting or growing our own resources or leveraging our own resources, that is a resource that we can start to leverage better.
Thank you.
Do you support?
Just a second,
Sorry.
Miles.
Yeah.
I think one metric that is worth looking at is housing burden, wherein people pay more than 30% of their income towards
Absolutely.
housing.
Absolutely.
I know that is a situation that I personally am in. My housing costs more than 30% of my income, and I don't make minimum wage. I make more than that working at the hospital.
Right.
Just wanted to touch in on that real quick. Just sort of give a watermark there.
Yeah, and the question is how far-reaching or broad should a municipality be to tell your company you need to pay your people more? There are mechanisms to it, right? But there's a question on what that looks like and how to do that effectively and how to do that responsibly, because the pendulum can swing. As the pendulum is too far to the left, it can swing way too far to the right, and we need to balance that in a way that's responsible for everybody.
I think we can come up with a number of creative solutions to approach the core issue there.
Exactly, and that's kind of the point with in this conversation and in other conversations that I've had around housing and livable wages and minimum wage and job creation in our area, is that this is a community issue, and community partners need to address this together. It can't just be one person sitting in a room reading the internet saying, "Oh, I've got the solution to this problem. Here we go. All right, everybody.
I read a book.
I fixed it." Yeah, exactly. Right. So, like I said, though, but like I said earlier, solving these problems is a one second. All right, sorry about that. Technical issue. You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah. So the point that I'm making is that this is a community-driven conversation, and it has to be driven by experts, not experts and decision makers who are experts as well, so that these decisions are informed. They're community-driven. They're based in reality and fact, and they benefit and they have mutual benefit for everybody involved, not just the ones or twos. Yeah. And sometimes there needs to be a more heavy-handed approach to make sure that there's you do bring people up that have been disenfranchised or downtrodden, and you make sure that they have an equitable opportunity, because they haven't had one, and that might look unfair to bring people up, but that sometimes is what you have to do. But it is situational.
Our next question, Miles.
Local expansion to the housing choice voucher program?
Yeah, and as you my understanding of that program is a federal program administered through a local housing authority, and it certainly is. It doesn't. If anything, it makes not only it gives opportunity to renters to find quality housing when there is a housing crisis, or when there is a lack of quality housing, and it makes the landlord whole at the same time. I have no problem with it supporting and expanding that. That seems like it's a reasonable approach to solving a problem, especially when, you know, somebody may need a larger house or a larger place to live. They can't afford it, and the landlord is charging what could be potentially be fair for that, but that person still can't afford it. So, you know, making sure that the landlord is whole and the renter can find quality housing that fits their need, and then supporting the housing authority to be able to do that. I see no problem with supporting something like that.
Yeah. So before we go on to the next part, which is the lack of housing and all that, what you touched on before, is there anything else anybody would like to add on to rent and everything else that we know? Good. All right. So for the first question on housing shortage, development, and access, what do you do to create affordable studio or one housing for low-income single earners?
I think that, you know, when we look at the potential for development in our city, ensuring that, especially if there's going to be public benefit, or sorry, taxpayer use for developer benefit, that we do include some type of percentage of affordable housing, or a percentage of housing that is accessible. Certainly any development in our city should be accessible, ADA accessible, and handicap accessible anyway. But when it comes to, say, people who are developing in our city, there is an opportunity for us as a community to say, hey, look, this is the type of housing that we need, and making sure that there's a percentage of that housing shared across whatever new development there is. But there's also, you know, talking about going back to the opportunity to develop a land bank and to join the Clinton County Land Bank, is to also look at the opportunity for us as in the land bank, to leverage their tools to obtain that type of housing that can be remediated for a more affordable studio, one bedroom, or low income single earners, and leveraging that tool as a municipality.
All right. Do you think there's a housing shortage in Plattsburgh? If you touch on that. If so, where do you think those housing shortages exist?
They, you know, and I base this on the work that I've been doing inside of economic development throughout the region. We do have a housing crisis. I'm not going to argue that. It's a shortage. You know, 2% availability rate of rentals in Plattsburgh, and I think last time I looked, it was like 2 to 3% or so around there throughout the county. So yeah, we do have a housing shortage. We have a housing crisis, and it ranges. It really, in my experience and in the research that I've done, it does range. And, like, you know, I've heard people say, well, I've gone on Facebook and I've seen, or I've gone on Craigslist and I've seen, you know, plenty of, you know, $800 2-bedroom houses for rent. But I'll tell you at the same time that it does sound affordable, but, you know, we go back to what's the quality of that housing. You know, just because it's cheaper or less expensive, I should say, doesn't mean it's quality. And that's, you know, we'll touch on that concern as well. But it ranges. You know, there's a deficiency in housing that ranges between low to moderate income and what you might call, quote unquote, market rate housing. Or what that looks like. Even available properties for sale or for purchase is lacking as well. So it ranges between all of the available housing that we could potentially leverage in our community from different pay ranges of our citizens.
Yeah, I can say as a renter myself, the nicest, or I would say actually the most quality I've had is a $900 2-bedroom apartment, and that was the minimum that we could get, which was for good housing.
Right, and I have a friend who just moved into a 2-bedroom apartment. It's $1,200. $1,200. It's 2 bedrooms. It's a 2-bedroom apartment. He doesn't have a yard. He doesn't have his own laundry room. It's like, that's a lot of money, right? That's a lot of money. It's a nicer place. It's a quality place, but who can afford that, honestly, And we can look at Craigslist and say, oh yeah, there's a, $800 2-bedroom, or there's a $900 2-bedroom. But I mean, you can go and say you can find a $200 2-bedroom too, or a $500 2-bedroom, and be like, yeah.
I would like to add another fact and figure here. At the $11.80 New York State minimum wage, someone would be bringing home about $1,800 before taxes. So an $800 apartment would be almost half of their income.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it also appears Zoom has just gifted us with an unlimited meeting. So
yes. No 40-minute limit tonight.
I would, and I would like to say I am an advocate, even as a small business owner, and I'm not, I'm not saying this right now to gain favor or votes or anything like that. But even right now, I'm an advocate for an automatic $50 minimum wage throughout New York State, and I think that's immediate and it's needed. And even, in terms of putting my money where my mouth is, we're right now analyzing what that looks like for our own business, and making sure that we could do that for our own business, and doing the numbers and doing the math and making sure it's responsible for our, our employees and our customers and our business, for our business longevity. Because I could say, yeah, right now I'll make everybody $15 an hour, and it might not be affordable for the business, and the business might close, so we may creep up to that more rapidly than New York State demands. But at the same time, I think it's right now it's needed in our area and throughout New York State. So,
Miles, do you mind if I pop in for a second with a question?
Oh, yeah, no problem.
Sure. So you kind of touched on this, and actually one of the questions touched on this a little bit. You had mentioned something about missing housing, and one of the questions was about missing studio or 1-bedroom housing. There is, I would argue that there is a little bit of an issue in the community where a lot of the older homes in our community that are bigger, larger homes are being converted to student housing, which is resulting in either overcrowding or a lack of options for families who do need 3 or 4 bedrooms, housing in the community, being not able to find that within our city. How would you address, I guess what I would say is the lack of missing middle housing, or varieties of housing, varieties of types and sizes of housing? How would you address that?
Yeah. Again, as the mayor, I'm looking at what tools I have available. Part of those tools are, our existing building laws, existing building codes, right, and zoning and planning laws. If there's something in there that we could leverage to say, okay, well, I don't know if it would be mindful or responsible to say, well, okay, we're going to limit the number of houses that can be converted to student housing, because what we're seeing is quite the opposite. What we're seeing is a lot of housing, and I'm saying we, as in people that I talk to, realtors. I live right on Broad Street, so I see some student housing. I think I've seen 3 student housing convert to single family homes in the last maybe year or so. I haven't seen the opposite. I haven't seen it go the other way, where a large house in that neighborhood has converted into student housing. So it's anecdotal. What I'm saying is anecdotal. There certainly, we would need to dig into those numbers a little bit to find the reality of it. But maybe perhaps there is an opportunity to look at our current codes, code zoning and planning, and figure out a solution to that. As somebody who has a growing family, yeah, I am concerned if I have to move. What am I going to find? And we want families to move into our community, and we want families to grow in our community. So I agree that there is certainly a concern. I don't have a solution to it other than, we can keep going back to a land bank and identifying properties that we can build. There certainly is work that's being done, as you probably know, around master planning and identifying growth opportunities within the city, and identifying properties that could be developed on for that type of housing or for other kind of housing or for other industry. And so looking at this from the big picture, the biggest picture that we can look at it from is identifying the opportunity for development or kind of housing development. Where could that be? What kind of housing would be appropriate in that location, and ensuring that we have a good, strong balance of the types of properties that we want to develop.
Thank you. Miles, do you mind if I ask the next question, because I kind of have a follow-up question for it?
Yeah, of course.
All right, thank you. This was one of the questions that came in from the community on Facebook. Currently, ADA accessible housing is not located within our city center, and
That's right.
There's arguably not much in the city at all.
Yeah.
What would you do to increase the quantity of affordable accessible housing downtown or in other areas close to services and amenities? And my follow-up to that one is, in general, how do you feel about mixing the types of housing so that there's no longer necessarily single family housing neighborhoods and multifamily housing neighborhoods, and it's just all together? There's just housing and neighborhoods.
I mean, I don't,
next to a duplex, next to a single family home.
Yeah, I mean, like that's a good question, because part of it is, what does our neighborhood look like? What's the neighborhood vibe or the look and feel of a neighborhood? Do I want, if say, the lady next door sells her house and somebody buys it, do I want somebody putting a 4-story building there? No, I don't. What am I then putting a duplex or triplex? It's different, right? Like, I think it's the type of housing that fits in that type of zone or that type of residential zone, which is done responsibly. But I think that also lends itself back to zoning and planning, which I'm not an expert on, but looking at our zoning and planning and making sure that it's designed appropriately for its use. And I know that there's been talk about I think it's like form-based zoning or form-based planning or however, again, I've had maybe a couple conversations about this, but as long as it kind of fits the look and feel of the neighborhood, I see no real clear issue with having the use of a building have be a store or a coffee shop or a cafe, and it look like it belongs or looks like it fits. The ADA compliance or accessibility downtown is a little more difficult because we don't have first floor rentals, or we don't have first floor units. So understanding what that may look like in terms of securing compliance or forcing compliance on units that are downtown, current units that are downtown, versus ensuring that any new development in our city adheres to ADA compliance. And any new, like I said before, any new development in our city has a mix of housing affordability, especially if, and it could even be the potential of incentivizing or ensuring that we do have that mix of affordability in a new unit or a new development within the city, and codifying that or ensuring that.
Thank you.
To answer your question, please.
I think so. I think so. Yes.
All right. So the last
next
question
set of
is
questions. Sorry, I'm going.
I know you have to dip out. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I understand. Yep.
So we're on the. Do we have one?
So Lisa, are you coming back?
Right.
Sorry. Okay. All right. Sorry, Miles.
That's all good.
Okay.
So we're going to the DRI section
cool.
here.
Yeah.
So do you believe that giving large corporations subsidies for luxury apartments is a good idea? And do you believe this will somehow lower rental rates for the rest of the community?
Okay. No, I don't believe that giving large corporation subsidies for apartments or even residential buildings is sufficient. Not in the sense of, and certainly not as what we've seen. I think it would be a lot different if there were a stronger community benefit or a stronger community kickback if they are going to leverage some type of taxpayer subsidy meaning a pilot agreement, $1 land deal, offset, like a grant, anything like that. Even the city of Plattsburgh has a economic development revolving loan fund that, if used on housing, or refuse to develop or improve housing, there needs to be some percentage of that housing that is contributing to the low income availability. So, you know, if so in general, no, I don't agree with it. And I, you know, certainly if we talk specifically about the DRI, I don't agree with how that whole thing went down, and specifically about the pilot. And I don't agree with it continuing that in that direction. In terms of adding, so the question, do I believe that, I don't understand the second part of the question. I'm wondering if the second part of the question is, do I believe that if we add luxury apartments is going to somehow lower rental rates for the rest of the community? Or do I believe that giving large corporation subsidies is going to somehow lower rental rates for the community? I'm going to go with the first assumption, that do I think adding luxury apartments is somehow going to lower rental rates for the rest of the community? I don't believe that it's going to somehow lower rental rates, but I'll tell you what I'm seeing. In the county and in Plattsburgh. And I say the county, but it's all encompassing. Because we have, even right now during a pandemic, our unemployment rate is like hovering like right around 4.5%. I think at the worst we were at 10%. At the best we were at 3 something, right? So we're starting to employ more people, and there's more jobs available for people, and people are going back to work. And what we're seeing throughout the county is that property owners, landlords, people who have available housing are making improvements to their housing, and they're charging more rents for that, and they're realizing that there's enough people working that can afford to pay for it without a voucher, that when they increase those rents, those people who do need a voucher or do need subsidized housing are being pushed further and further away from the job center, further and further away from our downtown, further and further away from public transit and public transit lines. So now I do have to preface this, not saying that adding luxury apartments is going to solve that problem, or I don't support prime. I don't support that development. I just want to make sure that that's, again, crystal clear. That I believe adding any housing is going to help stabilize. Again, you talked about supply and demand. If we only have a very small subset of housing available, and we're having people vie for that, it's going to naturally increase the expense or the cost of that commodity. So adding more of that commodity, it will stabilize it for a period of time, not forever, but it will stabilize it for a period of time. And then as people move into the community, it will start to increase some more. So we do have to have a broader plan for adding more housing in general. But I don't believe adding just adding luxury apartments is going to lower rental for the rest of the community.
Yeah. So you don't agree with like the actions taken, the exact way that they've gone about it, but the intentions you believe are in the right way.
Hey, Miles,
Say that
hang tight for a second.
Yeah, sorry. Say that again.
So you don't believe? Is it doubling for you as well?
I think, Chris, since you took off your headphones,
Yeah.
it's echoing.
Hold on. Let me see if I can fix that. My headphones just keep disconnecting. So.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Gotta get yourself a cord.
Okay. How's that? Yeah, I know. That'd be a lot better. Hold on. Let me turn my other phone. Okay.
We can edit that out in post.
Yeah. Technical difficulties. It's gonna happen.
So annoying. All right. You think I'd have this Zoom thing figured out by now?
I don't think any of us
all
do.
of us would. No.
Man, tell me about it. Okay,
unfortunately, normally I would use my laptop, but that broke like 2 weeks ago, and now I have to use my phone. It's like, oh god. So,
sorry, Miles. You were saying. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all right. So you don't agree with how they've gone about it with the DRI and the prime. You don't agree with what you believe is going to be the outcome of it, but you do agree that the intentions behind it are in the right way.
Well, I believe that we need to add housing. I don't know. Again, I can't interpret or understand their intentions behind it, or why that development, or why they chose, that the approach. I can't. I'm not going to say anything about that because I just don't agree with it. I don't. Just the whole mess of it is not. Was not and has not been consistent with what our community is demanding. Uh, we need housing. Is not an endorsement of the project or the process or the end result, or even the end result of that project, right? Like, my point is we need housing. I don't, but going back to the question, I don't think adding one. I don't agree with subsidizing. Um, I don't agree with subsidizing housing development um, in that way. And if we do as a tool, because these are economic development tools, $1 land deals, tax abatements, grants, things like that. Those are economic development tools, but they need to be coupled with a very strong community benefit agreement, or very community strong benefit for those, or oversight for those types of projects that do benefit from us, spending money here, or living here, or raising our kids here, or buying property here, or whatever, doing business in the city, right? This is money that we pay into this, and if we get no clear benefit as a community out of it, it just doesn't make sense to me that's a logical or sound approach. And I don't think that adding luxury apartments is going to somehow lower rental rates for the rest of the community.
Gotcha. Yeah. All right. John, do you have anything you want to add or ask, or no? Do you support IDAs providing tax exemptions for real estate ventures? And what types of housing would you support being financed with public funds?
Yeah, I would support the IDA providing tax exempt, or it's a pilot agreement, a payment in lieu of taxes, as long as it fits the exact criteria without deviation and without special dispensation. Just like Bombardier gets a tax abatement or a pilot agreement. Even within the city, let's talk about the city of Plattsburgh and housing. The Violet's home, they just got a pilot agreement, for senior housing, for senior housing. They get a tax abatement, but they're also creating a ton of jobs, right? So there's no special dispensation or special deviation to a pilot application, because they are following those guidelines, they are following those rules. But even with that being said, even as they are following those rules and those agreements, I would still like to see a community benefit out of them doing that. Not just, there's job creation, which is community benefit, but we could use public art. We could use investment into our parks. We can use investment into our waterfront. Which, if we're going to give, taxpayer money to help private business, then hey, there's more than just creating jobs that we need in our community that you can contribute back to, in that sense. In terms of the type of housing financed with public funds. I don't know the answer to that question, to be honest. I think that there's a balance. If a company did come in and say, yeah, we would create, half of our available housing would be low income or affordable housing, maybe there's a consideration there. There's always going to be grant opportunities, federal grants or state grants for housing development. Even the $400,000 that I referred to earlier about the low-income home ownership program that the county provides, that's taxpayer money, but it's also used to help put low-income families in homes. So that's something that I'm fine with without a public agreement or public benefit. But at the end of the day, when it comes to new housing development or development of properties or housing, or even improvement of properties or housing using public funds, private housing using public funds, I think that there's a broader conversation for if we do that, what's our benefit to it, and making sure that that benefit is clear. It's not just about job creation.
Gotcha. So, well, we've gone into this a bit, but it doesn't hurt to ask again. What is your position on the projected rents in the DRI Durkee Street prime development, and how do you see this as an improvement, in quotations, for Plattsburgh when many already struggle with affordability?
Yeah, I mean, like that's again, like there is a need for housing. There's a need for a range of housing. I don't like that. The projected rents is last I heard. It was the number of units. There was 10% of those units were corporate housing or long-term stay housing, and there was a split between 1 bedrooms and 2 bedrooms. The 1 bedrooms ranged anywhere between 11 to I think something like 1,300 or 1,400, and the 2 bedrooms range anywhere between 14 and 19. I don't know if that's still the case. But it goes right back to what I said before about my buddy who just moved into a 2 bedroom and is paying $1,200. It's like, it's not that I don't know people who can afford that. I do know people who can afford that. I don't know why they would want to. That's a different question altogether. But again, if that's the only property that's available or the only housing that's available to them, and sometimes they're kind of stuck, we can go back to having that conversation about that housing choice voucher, right? But I don't think that that's an improvement. It doesn't help. Overall, it doesn't help. Not just that in its own. Not just that on its own. It needs to be part of a bigger conversation for, if we're adding that, how do we ensure that the rest of these opportunities, the rest of these properties, or new project or property development, new housing development is also affordable or low income. It's a balance between the two. It's not a silver bullet.
Right. So we'll go away from DRA here for a moment. I think Elise can get back in. Hello. So for this part, it's property maintenance. Oh, Elise, do you have, before we get into this, do you want anything?
No, there was one question that was popping up while you guys were discussing that, but I can't recall what it was at the moment.
Okay.
Maybe it'll come back to me at some point. Oh, I think it had to do with transportation, actually. So kind of into deeper housing theory. You can discuss housing affordability on the limited scope of, what is 30% or more of your income is a burden. But then there's also the other scope of looking at it as there's a housing burden cost if between housing and transportation combined, if you spend more than 45% of your income towards those costs. And in our community, we do have limited public transportation. City residents in particular do not have public transportation through the school district. So those, all students within the city school district, almost all students, not counting those with any IEPs or specialized instructional plans, they are commuters to school. Do you have anything any plans or thoughts on how you would address transportation and how that affects affordability in general in our community?
Yeah, and that's something, and I do have to say, a lot of the things that I put on the plan for Plattsburgh is and has been informed through conversations like this and conversations I've had in the county, conversations I've had in the community. And so part of what we've added to that proposal is ensuring that we do have multimodal transportation, a clear and solid multimodal transportation plan that includes driving, walking, biking, and public transit throughout the city. Understanding that we are such a small landmass, 5 square miles or a little bit more than 5 square miles, it shouldn't be impossible for us to ensure that people can travel the width and breadth of our city easily and safely. And so understanding and transportation is a key factor for job creation and economic development and housing stability and job, and job stability. We hear it a lot. We hear a lot of complaints at the county level that, somebody who lives in Champlain that works at mowed right, can't get to work. They can't make that last mile. The last stops 2 miles from their house, and come wintertime, come rain time, it's like, it's not feasible or reliable for that person to make it to work every day. So yeah, there certainly is an overarching concern about transportation in our community within the city of Plattsburgh, especially throughout the county. And so ensuring that we have the proper infrastructure to address that, even safe bike lanes, protected bike lanes in the city. And again, this is not, it's not the end game. It's not the quote unquote solution. It's a suggestion. And it's something for us to sit down together and work through and work out through conversation and through dialogue. But it's a proposal, and ensuring that our public transit system is solvent, because we do have to rely on the county's public transit system, and it's not making its own money, right? It has to be subsidized, which it's appropriate that it is subsidized. That's appropriate for our communities to do that. But we also have to make sure that it's available and reliable in the city.
Thank you.
All right. So for property maintenance, landlord-tenant relations, and legislation, off to the meaty stuff. How would you address inadequate and/or untimely property maintenance by landlords? How would you hold landlords accountable for the condition of their property?
Yeah. So as you probably know, there had been a recent landlord registry law that got passed that was fairly punitive. That law got revised and repassed, but underneath it, I think, and again, I look at this from the mayor's perspective, is that there are codes to be enforced that are not being enforced, and there's a balance between ensuring that they're enforced adequately and ensuring they're enforced timely, or even adhered to, which would be even better, more proactive than having to go out and enforce these codes, but making sure that they are, being appropriately adhered to as a property owner, and making sure that if they're not, then there are punitive measures to take, and there are, and that's the concern that I have going into this job, is that the resources that the city has, even though that this is an opportunity to offset expense and to keep our citizens safe and our residents safe, is that we don't have the adequate staffing level to enforce these types of codes. And so there is a concern that even having these codes, but it's like having a law with no teeth. Why have the law, right? Like it seems that, I don't want to say pointless, but you have to be able to enforce these things for people to understand that there's punishment if you don't adhere to that. And so that, ensuring that we can leverage the current codes that are in place, and then see if there's anything outside of that we need to introduce, and then to introduce it properly. But I think that's both, it's both addressing the property maintenance as well as the accountability for the condition. And part of that is, ensuring that there are protections, which I believe there are enough protections at this point. I'd have to go back to look at the law. The last time I looked at it, it seemed like there was enough protections at this point to ensure that tenants could address these concerns, address improper maintenance, and address inappropriate conditions for properties, and have those issues addressed appropriately without being attacked.
Gotcha. So how would you support landlords in instances of tenant abuse of the property, tenant uncleanliness, and or abuse of service animal regulations?
Wow.
Did that go through?
Yeah, I'm thinking about that one. Yeah.
Yeah, no, take your time. I didn't know if I cut out or anything.
No, I got you. That is it's challenging to do because we do have a lot of laws and codes right now that says, if as a landlord, if you don't uphold your property, then you get, a fine or you get a notice and you have to fix it. And, that's investment into that. The flip side of that is not so clear for a municipality to say, oh, you're a tenant and you just, caused $2,000 worth of damage in a property, or you're, you are leaving, garbage on the lawn and it doesn't really have anything to do with the landlord. I don't know how to solve that, to be honest, other than, maybe working with the landlords to understand individual cases. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't really have a clear answer to that. But certainly we see it though, right? We do see, we see it. We see tenants in, if you want to talk about, the kind of the negative outlook on college students, you do, I hear it all the time. I hear it every single year. You have, a tenant or a landlord that owns a college housing that, they might put $1,000 of improvements in every year, and you get $2,000 worth of damage, and I don't know how to solve that for landlords.
I think the court system takes care of that.
Yeah.
I mean, like that they do. I think landlords are protected in that sense, but also they, if the tenant is abusing, the property and leaving garbage outside, and it's a code violation for the landlord, then the landlord is the one that gets fined, not the tenant. And I don't know how that gets passed on. And the landlord could pass it on, but is that as effective as, the tenant being ticketed or fined for something like that if they're doing bad? I don't know.
How would you address properties that don't provide enough parking on site for tenants?
Yeah, that also is a requirement for our city. And again, it goes back to, codes and enforcement of codes. And I see it walking from, my house to downtown. You've got, student housing, and you got people parked on the lawn, which is a code violation. And that's where they park. That's kind of where they're given to park. It's not paved and it's not, set up for parking there. But again, that is a code violation. And I think that is the way to address that and enforcing that code. But then, like I said before, it goes back to making sure we have the staffing and the resources to be able to enforce those codes consistently and effectively.
Gotcha. How do you address properties that don't provide enough trash receptacles on site for tenants, particularly when waste removal is included in the lease?
I mean, again, there are still codes that say you can't leave trash outside, right? So this in particular is it. Again, I have to look at it from the context of a city trying to enforce codes on landlords and tenants, right? So again, I have to rely on the codes that are already in place. Are there fines or are there tenant complaints that could happen? Sure, there are, right? And that's something for us as a municipality to manage, to ensure that, if a landlord says, yes, we provide garbage removal, but the garbage is backed up and piled up and hasn't been collected, and it's stacking up, then that is a code violation, and we should look at it that way.
Right. Do you believe an inspection should take place and a new certificate of occupancy should be issued upon a change in tenancy?
I don't, because there's a mechanism in place right now that requires properties to be inspected every 3 years. But then again, it does require us to have enough. It does require us to have enough staffing to be able to do that. Now, that doesn't prevent us from saying particular types of housing, because we know that student housing is somewhat problematic year after year, with new students coming in and new students going out every year, and making sure that is making sure that type of housing is which is historically, under developed, I guess, or under maintained. It seems like that. It seems like that type of housing is under maintained. So there could be a specific type of housing that we look at considering for something like that, or for some type of inspection or some type of certification that says yes, we've checked all the boxes and all the boxes are checked, and then you have somebody confirming that. But like if you leave your apartment and you have a $900 deposit, safety deposit, or however much you paid in safety deposit, you're incentivized to fix it up and to make it look nice. And there's rules around just general wear and tear, normal wear and tear that you're protected against. So there are certainly incentives for you as a tenant to ensure that you're leaving the place nicer, or at least not trashed, that wouldn't require a new certificate of occupancy. But that's not always the case with certain types of housing, like I said, with student housing.
So can I jump in again for a second, Miles?
Yeah, please.
So you mentioned that there is a mechanism in place to allow for inspections every 3 years periodically.
Yes. Is that right? 3 years? Or is it?
The 3-year statute is correct. However, that
Mhm.
applies only to multifamily dwellings, which are units
Gotcha.
with, I believe, 4 or more units within a building. So that is going to exclude many of the homes and rental homes within the city of Plattsburgh. Again,
Okay.
a figure that I think most people in the community are aware of, or at least that follow this issue. It's 62% of our community rents.
Yep.
Many
right.
of those are in converted older homes, which are single family homes, duplexes, occasionally a triplex, or what you'll find often are converted homes that have been made into some sort of apartment building that's not really apartment building.
Right.
So those homes are not covered by that state mandated 3-year inspection schedule. The rental registry law that was passed last year and then revised recently also does not cover those types of homes. The only expansion that took place within that rental registry law, which really was just to compel a registry so they can find out who to contact if there is is an issue.
Yep.
That really only expanded it to, I'm sorry, I don't have the actual definition in front of me, but I believe it was something along the lines of a unit that contains 5 or more unrelated individuals who do not eat together. It's a very, very specific definition that will apply to a very, very, very limited number of housing, and primarily that might be perceived by some to be targeting specifically student housing, frat houses.
Yes. Well, and that's I think that was without knowing the intention, it seems like reading it was fundamentally the intention of targeting student housing in Center City.
So now knowing that
Yes.
3-year periodic inspection schedule does not apply to most of the rental units.
I think it'd be, thank you for that. And I think it would be fair to then revisit and really take a look at it, maybe not once a year, maybe every other year, or we would also want to look at, well, on average, what is the cycle of turnover, and maybe build something around that. I don't know how long you guys have been in your places or if you rent or not, but if you've been there for 5 years and on average, most people stay in their place for 5 years, maybe that's the number that people need to recertify for a certificate of occupancy. But also part of it is working together with you, working together with the landlord groups to understand, like, what does that look like and what's equitable for everybody.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Thanks, Liz.
Sounds good. All right. What are your thoughts on the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act of 2019 and on the rental registry law originally passed by the city in 2019 and recently revised in 2020?
Well, are you talking about the Emergency Tenant Protection Act that I referred to earlier? I don't know about the Housing Stability. Yeah, I think it's the same one. But like I said, that it provides, and looking at this law and understanding the impact of it, I think it was mostly geared towards suburbs of New York City to expand their rent stabilization and rent protection for tenants. And that did not impact broadly. It didn't impact us up here because it just didn't include the types of properties that, the single families and the duplexes that it outlined protected, was under protection in that. I think it addresses a handful of concerns that we have in terms of securing housing for seniors and people with disabilities, but there's also caveats to it that we can't, it just didn't apply to us. The rental registry, the first iteration of it, again, I thought was done in a vacuum. I don't think it took into account significant factors that impact tenants. It certainly didn't take in certain factors that impacted landlords. I would have preferred to see groups come together to address the problem, to see if there was another solution to it, rather than just passing some heavy-handed, in my mind, a heavy-handed law. And then when it came back in 2020, still people weren't at the table to help make informed decisions on how to have it be more equitable for everybody. I think the current version of it allows for some flexibility and insurance of proper maintenance and enforcement of codes, which is, again, that's needed. I don't think it needed to be as punitive as it was first designed, though.
Yeah. I think even like a early version of it even said in file out that like only applies to New York City area, or similar.
The Emergency Tenant Protection Act. I think it even outlines specific counties that surrounded New York City, which, like I said, it just doesn't quite apply to us, even though we are seeing some concerns about housing up here. It just doesn't apply to us. Not directly, not like that.
Yeah, the Tenant Protection Act was an expansion of a 1970s law.
Yeah, that's right.
I
Originally,
believe it was 1974.
Yeah. Which wasn't it like, if we want to go back, wasn't it like some World War II relic when people were moving back in New York City and there was not enough housing, so they had to protect a bunch of like people moving back or something like that.
You know more than me then.
Yeah, I dug into it. I dug into it a while back, so we'll have to kind of fact check that one. But
it was plagued by like the fact that 5 different people ended up writing it, and all in different, like you said, from like 1970s to 80s and 90s, and like there's just different groups all at different times and different areas just trying to apply to it, and it just never gained, until recently, it's never been focused as an individual, So anyway, let's. Are you willing to commit tonight to meeting with tenant advocates and to make a good faith effort to address tenant concerns regarding the rental registry law?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like I'm always available. Like even in my legislative duties and my community duties, I'm always available to sit down and to address concerns of our community. And part of that is, for me, my leadership style just tends to want to be informed. I want to be informed. I want to make, my job as a legislator and somebody who's elected in our community and somebody who wants to make a difference in our community lends itself to meeting with people, understanding concerns of our community, understanding how to fix those problems. Even, I think that's part of it is trying to make our community better with the tools and the resources that I have as a legislator and somebody who's involved, and just like you all, right? Just like, you guys do the same thing. You seek out, opinions, you seek out, diverse opinions, you seek out information to help make our community better. And I would love to sit down and make sure that people, especially people who are impacted, have a seat at the table, and they can help inform these decisions in a way that makes the most sense for our community.
Cool. What are your thoughts?
I do have to say that I think that also goes to ensuring that, because it impacts renters, it impacts landlords, that we should all have a seat at the table. We should all try to be working together to sort that problem out, because they, look, I know a lot of those folks, and they know that there's a problem. They know that there are bad actors. They know that there's things that can be better, that can be solved. So, I think giving everybody a chance to sit down and to contribute to that makes a difference.
Absolutely. What are your thoughts on the following proposed actions the city could take to balance the tenant-landlord relationships? A, expand the rental registry law to all rentals in the city of Plattsburgh, so tenants may share in the benefits of its protection. Let's just go one by one. There's a lot.
Yeah, sure. Let me dig into that, because the last that I read that law, it sounded like it included an expansion of rentals, including vacation rentals. So people who are renting their places out temporarily, who are not part of a, they call it, like, trying to define what a family was in that law, which is just like, I looked at it, I was like, I'm not going to swear, but I looked at it and I swore when I read it, and I was like, what is going on in this thing? It didn't make much sense as to what the end result was. Yeah, so I would look at it. I would, because we are 60 plus 60 to 63% renters in our community. And we do need people to be protected who are in, sometimes economically vulnerable situations, vulnerable positions, and who are sometimes beholden to landlords and property owners, for better or for worse, or it's situational. So yeah, I would want to take a look at what are the opportunities to protect tenants, and to secure housing in the city, and to make sure that we're all made whole, renters, landlords in the city.
Absolutely.
So do you personally believe that the rental registry law should be expanded to all rentals and not just the 5 unrelated individuals who do not die?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, was that
Yeah, I'm looking. I think maybe not single family housing, but multi-unit housing for certain, even up to duplex. I agree would fill in that, but I also think we would want to look at. I certainly would want to understand what that turnover looks like, and how that impacts that kind of registry law. Because right now it seems like it doesn't really protect many people, except for if they fall into, or if they're students, if they fall into a very short, narrow window of rentals in our city. So it does make sense that more people are protected from retaliation, more people are ensured that the housing that they live in is up to code, outside of just our current, code enforcement. But again, I'd certainly look at expanding it, but in partnership with people involved, everybody that's going to be impacted by it. I think that's fair.
Do you mind going into more detail about why you don't believe it should be expanded to single family homes?
Well, because I think that the turnover may not be as extensive, or there may not be as much of a problem in those. But like I said, I would need to, and I think it would be fair for us to research that a little bit more. But I think that the concerns that are being expressed in that tenant registry, or that rental registry law, may not be as applicable to certain level of rentals as it is to others.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So be as a part of the rental permitting process, require landlords. Let's ask for as a part of the rental permitting process. It requires landlords to provide certificates. certification of attendance at a tenant's rights or landlord responsibilities course on a periodic basis.
Would you be opening to adding that requirement as part of the rental permitting process?
No, I wouldn't. I think that landlords do need to understand the law. They need to understand the code, and it's beholden on them to understand that without forcing them through some type of course to understand that. It should be part of what they do automatically as a landlord. They should know that. They should know the law. Just like, you're driving down the street, you should know that you're driving on a 30 mile per hour street, not drive 40. So you should know the law. You should
driver's permit or driver's license to be able to
you
operate.
sure you do, but it's your responsibility to understand and to go to the courses and to take the classes and to understand that law on your own. And that law is out there, right? Those codes are out there. You can do that studying on your own. You can do that studying without some type of like license to then say, oh, I've taken this course and I know what to do, right? I don't think that should be required. I hear where you're coming from. I understand where you're coming from, and I think that it like having. Yeah. I would also
Q&A
say
session, so I'm not going to grill you tonight, but
no, please, no. That's why I'm here for. No, honestly, that's why I'm here. I want you guys to understand my thinking and my approach, and short of having a dialogue about why I'm thinking this way, it's just like, oh, here's a soundbite, and I know how those go. Those don't go well. But I'll tell you that
you require somebody who is going to give you a haircut to attend some level of training and be licensed and to certify to some sort of licensing agency that they have the skills and knowledge to be able to do that job and provide that service. The city has enacted a law that says we are permitting you to do this or to provide this service. Do you believe as part of that permitting process, they should be required to show evidence of having required the skills and knowledge to be able to perform that service?
I don't, because it's not, I think that there's a difference. There certainly is a difference. And I did use an example of driving around a 2,000 plus vehicle on city streets that you could, do some serious damage with. But I also don't think that something like this specifically would require landlords to provide some certification of attendance to a course on how to rent appropriately or what codes you should be adhered to in your property and how you should be doing maintenance. There certainly are. Is it echoing?
I hear something in the background. Okay, yes, exactly.
All right. I don't see that as. I mean, ultimately, what's the problem we're trying to solve? I would say, what's the problem we're trying to solve? If the problem is ensuring that landlords know that they should be adhering to codes, that there's laws that they need to adhere to as landlords, that they can't violate those laws, then I think there's other mechanisms to that outside of forcing them to go. I say forcing them, but outside of requiring them to provide some certificate of attendance on tenant rights.
I'm going to disagree with you.
No, that's fine. No, I appreciate that too. I appreciate that. I don't think everything I'm going to say everybody's going to agree with. And
I think worst case scenario, right? if my hairdresser doesn't have a license, then maybe I end up with a bad haircut. Worst case scenario, if my landlord doesn't know that they're supposed to provide fire alarms, smoke detectors, that they're supposed to maintain the property to a certain level, that they're supposed to honor my basic rights as a tenant. That has a much larger impact on my actual life than I got a bad haircut today, or I got a speeding.
Yeah, no, I understand that, and I can appreciate that, and I think that there are mechanisms to ensure that they are honoring those codes and those laws. Outside of requiring them to, or even requiring that type of process or certificate so that they can then turn around and rent, right? Like, I think that there's just a different mechanism for it. And part of that is part of that is as they, making sure that they have that information, certainly. I just don't see it as make sure the landlord goes through this attendance and, because look, when it comes down to it, some people might be renting to their mother, or they might have an apartment in the back that they're renting to their daughter or something like that, right? Where it then becomes like, in my mind, it just becomes a little heavy-handed from a governmental perspective, where we can and we want to protect tenants' rights, and I'm an advocate for that, of course, and figuring out how to solve that problem outside of forcing somebody to go through a certification process there's a different solution to that. I don't know what it is. It just, that seems a little heavy-handed. That's all.
Miles, point C.
So for maintaining tenant rights pamphlets in the finance department and offer them to residents signing up for the new MLD accounts. So it's worded oddly, but
it's part of
yeah,
the
like would I agree to that? Yes, of course. I think any, of course, I think any piece of education to ensure that the majority of our population is being protected and educated, it makes sense, right? So yes, of course.
And then
Miles, actually skip point D, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I guess now we're going to personal questions, or quote unquote raw questions.
Hang on a minute, Miles. Shalise, were these raw questions? Were these the ones that you adapted into the previous ones?
Yeah. So the questions
gotcha.
on the document that you guys are looking at, those are all the questions that I consolidated from Facebook outreach through various groups on Facebook, community groups. Those are all the responses we received, and then the questions that we asked tonight were the best consolidation we could do. Some of them were repetitive or on a similar topic, so that was it.
Yeah, I just didn't want us to rehash the same stuff over again. We've already been here.
Yeah,
for
I started reading them. I was like, this sounds very familiar.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm looking through them as well to see if there's anything like.
Yeah. So I guess this is an informal. If you want to take maybe a 5-minute break before we get into just. Or want to just jump right in?
We're an hour and a half into this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the time kind of.
Well, it might be enough, right?
Yeah.
That, and I just got a notification. My computer battery is going to die in about 28 minutes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm available. We can still chat if you want. I'm available. I've got nothing else to do other than talk to you folks, and I'll get some sleep later.
Yeah.
But
was there anything else you wanted to
add? What is your position? Where do you see tenant advocacy? Your tenant advocacy group. How do you want to fit in, or how do you expect to say fit in? But you know what I mean. Like, how do you? Let me put it this way: you've got PCC, kind of involved. You've got landlord groups involved. You got Berkey Street groups involved. I've been advocating for business groups to be involved. Yeah. Where's your role? Where's your ideal situation where this group or the Plattsburgh Tenant Association fits in? Where do you want to fit in? Like, what would be your ideal situation where you help shape, inform policy or decision making, or how does that work for you?
So I will primarily defer to John on that one. He is the founder of the Plattsburgh Tenants Advocacy Association. Before doing that, though, I will at least say that there are a number of groups in this community that are all focused on housing. There's ETC, there's United Way, there's Plattsburgh Housing Authority. There's a number of organizations, legal aid, that all address housing in our community. And I think there is, in many different ways, they're looking at similar issues, but sometimes the unique circumstances surrounding housing in our community. Some of them focus on affordability. Some of them focus on access to housing. Some of them focus on things like that. I think when you're looking at it specifically from a tenant perspective, maybe it's safeguarding those rights that many tenants in our community feel have been and are and continue to be repeatedly violated by certain members or property owners within our community. I would invite you to ask us questions, ask other representatives of tenants and individuals within our community questions. There is a landlord tenant committee hosted by the city of Plattsburgh that I'm currently serving on. We meet approximately bi-weekly right now. Our next meeting is this coming Wednesday at 4. At our last meeting, which unfortunately was not recorded due to technical issues with outdated software that the city has, that one did not get recorded, but we had an excellent session in which a member of a local agency that assists low-income tenants addressed a lot of these concerns and talked about the concerns and the problems that they see in our community.
What was the group?
Legal Aid Society of Northeastern New York.
Oh, legal. Okay, legal.
So they specifically represent tenants in legal situations specifically. So these are tenants that are being evicted or going through an eviction process or not getting their landlord to act on their rights. One of the figures that came up on a recent housing task force, Clinton County Housing Task Force call, was that there's a 700% increase in illegal evictions this year from over last year. 700% in our community.
Was that due to COVID, like not understanding COVID and?
It possibly could be. It certainly could be. It could be that the landlords in our community are finding it difficult right now to rely on the court system as a method to evict tenants right now. But again, these are illegal evictions. So when we talk about illegal evictions, we're talking about evictions in which there is not just cause, or somebody does come in and finds other ways to try to forcibly remove a tenant, including removing doors, shutting off utilities, things that can make a space uninhabitable in some way or another. So there are a lot of these tactics. And I think one of the primary reasons that our group in particular is pushing for expansion of the rental registry law is because there is a serious fear of retaliation in this community. If you complain against your landlord, there is a chance that your landlord can do this illegal eviction process. Again, we've seen a 700% increase in this in the past year in our community. In that situation, and as we've discussed, there is a 2% vacancy rate in rental housing in our community. These people become displaced from their home, and they have nowhere to go. We have a rising population.
they become part of that DSS process that we've seen, right? So I understand that.
And that's low income in particular. And I mean, legal aid, that 700% figure comes from legal aid, who specifically assists only low income individuals. And rental housing is not unique to low income individuals. There are individuals in moderate or higher income levels that also rent and rely on that flexibility of being able to move around or not be committed with a mortgage to a location for a set number of years. So this is something that is prevalent in our community. Maybe it is more prevalent in the lower income community. Oftentimes you'll find that, I'm not going to say that the rental community includes many mental health individuals with mental health issues, but you'll often find that people with mental health issues find themselves within the lower income community in the rental community. So those types of individuals may need assistance in being able to report issues or violations within their housing.
And with landlords, like, oh, sorry.
So that's just an example of why it would be better to have a program in place that automatically requires an inspection of that unit. Perhaps it's matching that 3-year schedule that's mandated by state for other mixed-use development, or sorry, not mixed-use, multi-dwelling developments. So they don't have to rely on making a complaint against their landlord to get a code officer to come and inspect their apartment. They can just be sure and certain that every 3 years it's going to be inspected anyway. I do encourage you to find out more information from a lot of the individuals that work with these groups in our community, and they can give you higher statistics and numbers about how frequently they work with these individuals and what they do see in terms of retaliation. And another, sorry, my last point on this.
Yeah, please.
Another thing, in our community in particular, we do have a certain number, a small or certain number of individuals that are, I wouldn't necessarily say a monopoly, but they hold a certain number of property within the city of Plattsburgh. So if you burn that relationship with one landlord, you're burning it with every landlord in the city of Plattsburgh, or you are burning it with a future time. Let's just say, for example, Chris Rosenquest owns 10 developments throughout the city of Plattsburgh. If you have an issue with Chris Rosenquest in 2005, in 2018, when you need to go back to a Chris Rosenquest property somewhere else across the city, if you've burned that relationship, you are significantly reducing your opportunities for finding housing in the community. So that is something that makes people afraid to make complaints against a landlord.
Gotcha.
There's a certain fear factor there, and John is much better at putting this into words for me about the economic disparity and the imbalance of the tenant-landlord relationship and the economic power that a landlord has over a tenant. I mean, if the landlord has an issue with the tenant, there is a system in place through the court system to recover their losses. If the tenant has an issue with their landlord, yes, there are systems in place, but it does not account for those soft losses of not being able to find suitable replacement housing within the community, or possibly not ever being able to rent from that landlord again in the future, or having a reputation among the rental community or
well, especially when there's, it'd be one thing if you had a landlord that had 10 units, but there's 20 other units or 20 other landlords that had 100 units in a community, right? Like where there's options, but you're right. There are very little options for people to move, and afford a particular type of housing in our community because of the lack of housing that we see. But I am connected to a number of our mutual friends that work on housing issues in our community. So, and I appreciate that.
And even as a personal experience, I guess this part can be an unofficial bit, but like, as a tenant, I've had experiences online, as I've shared with John, with some local landlords that are so used to just threatening and pushing their tenants that it kind of becomes their personality. And I remember once, I didn't know at the time he was a landlord, but somebody made a homophobic comment and I called him out on it. And the first reply that I got, or the actually personal message I got, was a threat to go to the court. And it's just such an automatic. I was like, wait, what? Like, and then it kind of devolved into, and then now, ever since then, I have met a couple other landlords who also did not realize who they were. And like, oh, you're Miles. Yeah, I heard about you from so and so. And I was like, oh, okay, and it kind of, situations like that are not independent of each other. There are many cases like that where, one quote unquote wrong mistake, I mean, I don't know how it's a mistake for calling somebody out for homophobia, but that's how it happens. And it can, especially if you're somebody who if you don't have a car or anywhere to go, and you need to rent inside the city because you can't buy an Uber every time you have to go out. But you go into the monopoly that is the local area of landlords, all of a sudden you're screwed on that. And I've heard that way more than I should, and not even just through my own experiences, but it's such a common issue that we have locally. What Shalice was saying. So.
Yeah, and I could certainly see the argument for why expanding protections. Like I said, the majority of us are renters, and making sure that those protections are expanded, and doing it in a way that makes the most sense, and that's most reliable, makes the most sense for our community, and for everybody involved, right? Everybody that's going to be impacted, and that does make sense to me, and I think it would make sense to a lot of people that want to ensure that we have a solid group of housing available on all ranges of income levels. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Shalise, I know you did want to defer to me on Chris's initial question, but I do think you nailed it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, you got it. Yeah, that was
Went
good.
on a rant.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, this is important. It's important, right? Like, you know, when companies come to the community and they say, "All right, we want to move our company here," they say two things: do you have a trained workforce? We say, yeah, we've got a trained workforce, and if we don't, then we have the Institute for Advanced Manufacturing. We at Clinton Community College, we had SUNY Plattsburgh, workforce development. We can do these things, right? We can train up a workforce for you. And they say, well, do you have housing? And we say, no, we don't, right? So it's a job creation issue, right? It's an economic development issue, not having quality housing, not having available housing. And so making sure that we do have available housing on all income levels is crucial to the growth and survivability of our community. Otherwise we shrink, and like we've seen in the last years, you know, as our population is aging, we don't have enough younger folks and families moving into our community that's going to help backfill those the folks who are leaving our community. So housing is a concern, and it should be a major concern for all of us. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I didn't
I'm-
realize my phone's at 1%. So if I just cut out randomly, you know what
Yeah.
happened. I didn't realize until
Mhm.
I ran to grab my charger.
Okay.
I think we're at a good stopping point. We've covered a lot
Yeah.
of ground tonight.
Yeah. Well, you know, so thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You know, I am an advocate for low and moderate income families. You know, as not only just as a Democrat, you know, just my passion for people and contributing to my community lends itself to just providing as much support as possible. And so I really appreciate the opportunity with you all. I know it was a short turnaround, and I appreciate you all doing that. I think it's key given the issues that our community and our society is facing, especially in a COVID, all the inequities that have been highlighted during this pandemic. It's crucial for us to be mindful of who we are as a society and who we've become, and taking this opportunity to make some progress and changing that for the better. So I appreciate what you all are doing. I'm your partner in all of this as well. And so if you all need anything, just please reach out anytime for anything. And if I can't solve it for you, or if I can't help you solve it, then I know somebody who does. And so I am of service to you all. Okay, so I appreciate it.
Chris, thank you so much for
Yeah, thank you so
this with
much.
us, and thank you for doing it
Yeah.
on such short notice as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. Good night.